Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Red Leaf Card, your home for Canadian soccer news and views. I'm your host, Jacob Charouk. On today's episode, we'll be talking about Canada's soccer financial situation, Toronto FC's new coach, and League1 Canada expanding in the prairies. But first, here's your fixtures rundown. Canada draws with Guatemala 0-0. Halifax Wanderers defeats Forge FC 2-1. Pacific FC draws with Atletico Ottawa 2 apiece. Valor FC lost to Calvary FC 0-2. Club de Foot Montreal lost to New York City FC 0-1. Toronto FC lost to Real Salt Lake 0-1. Vancouver Whitecaps lost to Sporting Kansas City 0-3. And to talking about Canada's soccer situation of their finance, with me is Jason Whissell.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for having me back on.
So, what's happening in Canada Soccer Association with this whole financial situation?
Okay, so let's try and break this down because there is a lot to this story here, and it kind of needs a little background here. So, Canada Soccer has been openly talking about filing for bankruptcy because their financial situation is not good. They are mentioning the deal that was signed with Canadian Soccer Business. So let's kind of paint this picture here. Canadian Soccer Business was created basically based on this deal that requires, in order to be involved with the FIFA World Cup pitch to become a host city, Canada needed to have a professional league, right? Its own national league, hence the CPL. So what happened was Canada Soccer basically sold the broadcast rights and all the money associated with the broadcast rights for the national team to Canadian Soccer Business. For that, Canadian Soccer Business has been paying them between $3 and $4 million per year. The revenue that they have been getting goes directly to funding the CPL, and they also run League 1 as well. So in this deal, you have the creation of the CPL, a key point in securing Canada as a part host city of the upcoming World Cup in 2026. That being said, now Canada Soccer is saying that we have all these costs that we can't cover. They're having to turn down international friendlies and international matches in some of these windows because it's going to cost them too much. You see some of the prices where it's like about $5 million just to play against a decent European club in some of these international windows in preparation for the World Cup. They don't have the money in order to be able to send either the men's or the women's national teams to do these. So there's going to be not enough international warm-up competitions to get the teams ready for the World Cup. And you're a host city. And, say what you will about the deal, but it was a necessary evil because you needed to get that league up and running. And Canada Soccer wasn't making it. Canadian Soccer Business came in, presented them an opportunity, and they took it.
It's so kind of shocking with this whole drama with all this financial issue. And I think, you don't even have a professional league running from back in even before 2018.
Exactly.
You just have 3 Canadian American teams, you might say, which usually sometimes I call them American teams, which they're playing in an American league, like Toronto FC, Canadian-based, Vancouver Whitecaps, Canadian-based, even Club de Foot Montreal, Canadian-based. Why are they playing in an American league? Why did Canada Soccer Association decided why don't we have a Canadian professional league back then? From 2007, they didn't have a Canadian professional league.
It's tough. Like, you think about it. The media landscape at the time wasn't in the right state in order to be able to develop its own league. And we saw leagues in different sports pop up in Canada over the last 20 years. And they start with good intentions, but then the finances aren't there to continue it. I look back to the very short-lived Canadian Baseball League. It started out, and you had cities almost across the country, but by the time you get to the All-Star game, they realized that they didn't have the money to continue the rest of the season. So, in essence, what they did was the home run derby at the All-Star game. That was basically how you decided who was going to be the champion of that year, because they couldn't make it to the end of the season. There was no playoffs. It was, the season was dead on arrival halfway through. And they tried. They did try, and they had a broadcast deal with the Score Television Network at the time, but the finances weren't there behind the scenes, and it was failure. You see other sports trying. It's a ton of money to start a league from scratch, regardless of the sport, regardless of the fan base for the sport. And you can't deny that there isn't a fan base for soccer in Canada. It's there. What the CPL has provided is not just a grassroots organization that's helping to develop soccer talent here, but some of those players are then going on to the national team. And with League One, you have players from there working their way up to CPL, working their way up to either MLS or to the national team. You have development there that wasn't there before. Not everyone is Alphonso Davies. Not everyone can, go play in the Bundesliga or in the Premier League or, in Serie A or these highly competitive top leagues. There's only so many spots. Here, now, you have the CPL, you got your 8 teams, you're good to go, right? You got League One, so even if you don't make one of those teams, there's more semi-pro teams there for you, and the Canadian Championship allows those teams to be in the mix, against better teams. MLS is expanding, so there's opportunities there, but more often than not, you have to go down to the States because Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto can't pick every Canadian if they want to be competitive against these other cities that have international talent there. So more seats in Canada, more spots for soccer players equals more growth for the national game. The deal needed to happen. Now, the parties need to sit down and renegotiate before you get to the end of this deal, because when this deal initially hits that first 10-year cycle, the only person that gets to say we're going to continue for another 10 years the way things are going is Canadian Soccer Business. Canada Soccer has zero say in that. I think that's the scary part of this deal. Because Canadian Soccer Business, you see how League One is expanding. They're doing well enough, even though they had to come in and rescue York United. It's doing well enough, but that deal needs to be renegotiated if the national teams are going to prosper. Not on a personnel level, but on a financial level and an opportunities level.
Yeah, there's a lot of things problem with some of the negotiations with Canadian Soccer Business. But even, for example, for the national team, for getting their merchandise, for example, Canadian Soccer Association, if you get one of their jerseys, they don't even make any profit from it, since they made a negotiation with Canadian Soccer Business. Right now, they sign a contract with Macron. And if they decided, you know what, we're going to have Macron on the jerseys for the national team, I think they're most likely to make even a profit from it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But right now, it's the whole Nike thing. You're making nada, zero from that.
And that's because Canada Soccer only wanted to deal with Nike rather than CSB, who had some feelers out there and they were getting some prospects as far as deals go, but Canada Soccer only wanted to deal with Nike. That's it.
Like, every single time when I see these Macron jerseys for the Canadian Premier League, they actually look good. For example, Pacific FC, York United, all these jerseys that the Canadian Premier League that are doing with Macron, they do really well of representing these teams. But why Canada does not want to do anything with Macron?
I don't know if it's that they want to deal with anything with Macron. I think it's
Or maybe it's the whole deal with Nike that they did with for their jersey for their national team. Maybe it's that.
I mean, okay, first things first. You cannot lay this at the feet of Charmaine Crooks, who is currently the head of Soccer Canada, because this deal was signed well before she even entered the fray.
It's going to be Bontis.
Yeah, but still, like it's Canada Soccer needs to focus on dealing with organizations like FIFA, making and taking care of the national teams, right? If you, for lack of a better term, outsource the deals, like if they go into a proper partnership with CSB and it becomes a hand-in-hand thing, then I think you're going to see, a much better, financial situation. I don't know. Now, to his credit, Mark Noonan from CSB has come out and said they're trying to find ways to help Canada Soccer, because they recognize too that people are going to see all the finger pointing, and they're like, we're trying. But the thing is, you look at the deal when it was signed, right? Canada Soccer was dealing with IMG, and CSB comes in, offers them more money, and helps fill the hole that FIFA requires to become a host city. At the time, 2018, that deal looks great.
It is great.
It is. But once you realize that both men's and women's national teams are doing well enough to be in competition, right? Then you have to get those international matches. And, you start to hear reports that match fixers or, match agents basically, it's cost $5 million to get a match against, a top European club in the international windows leading up to the World Cup. That's a ton of money. Not to mention you had stories of, players, and I recognize how privileged this is going to sound, but hear me out on this one here, right? Players having to fly coach because it's all the Canada Soccer can afford, as opposed to, business or first class. I get that's a minor quibble, but it just goes to show that it's not like they're saying, no, we don't want to put you there. So we can't afford it. You saw the Heritage Commission come up with, Christine Sinclair and other players talking to, to Parliament and basically explaining, their side of things, money for practice, money for facilities. Canada Soccer, yes, I recognize cost of everything has gone up, right? But if you don't have the finances to do it, then you need to be open about it. You need to come out and say, we need help. We need to renegotiate this deal. We need more help. We need more sponsorships. We need more influx of cash into Canada Soccer if you want to find yourself cheering on those teams at international competitions.
Yeah, there's a whole thing that if you're looking for sponsorship, like you have Canadian Tire, for example, that's only, even Air Canada, they're only fixated for women's soccer that want to sponsor, that want to endorse, but they're not really fixated for the whole thing.
I mean, let's be honest. The women's national team is one of the best in the world, and it's not even under question, right? No. So obviously, sponsors, if they're going to put their money on something, they're going to put their money on something that has a chance to win it all. And Canadian women's soccer has a chance to win it all every time. Like, that team is phenomenal on the pitch, and they deal with a ton of crap off the pitch when it comes to these finances and the help that they get from Canada Soccer based on what they can afford. And yes, companies like Canadian Tire and CIBC, they only have so much to invest into different leagues. That's the other thing too. And I think we talked about this on another episode when we were talking about expansion in CPL and the likes. Expansion requires money.
And it does.
Funding these teams and these organizations requires money. That money has to come from somewhere, right? CSB, in getting the broadcast money from the national teams, as well as the subscriber fees from One Soccer, as well as the sponsorship money from the different teams in the in different provinces at different levels. There's money coming in there. They're doing their best to financially support these teams and this league so it can exist leading up to World Cup 2026. But I'm telling you right now, if something doesn't happen with negotiating the deal or new cash influx going into the national teams, you wonder how much longer a league like the CPL will last past World Cup 2026 once it's no longer a FIFA requirement to become a host city. If Canada's not a host city, or at least in the talks for it, you have to wonder if this deal even happens in the first place.
It's like, for example, there was a possibility that Edmonton would be to be part of the World Cup for Canada of the co-host, but it didn't. It was too much.
Yeah, and that's, you sometimes see blowback when cities start to discuss the possibility of becoming an Olympic host city, because the city puts up tons of money, millions upon millions upon millions upon millions, into becoming a host city, and then the IOC comes in, runs the event, and then bails out, leaving the city with all these infrastructure costs and buildings that are no longer being used. And like you go back to, I think it's the Sochi Olympics in Russia, you have buildings that basically, once the Olympics were gone, those buildings were left empty, barren, and deserted. You have all this infrastructure put in order to host this event.
Sometimes they use these Olympic stadiums as soccer events.
Yeah, well, absolutely. If you have the infrastructure there, then it's okay, right? And dependent on the Olympics, like whether it be summer or winter, and dependent on the city, like Calgary was perfect for the Winter Olympics because there were a few ski hills in Calgary for them to use, right? Same thing with Vancouver. You had infrastructure already there. You had BC Place where the Lions play already there. You had these facilities that you could use.
And now Vancouver Whitecaps play there.
Exactly, right? There's lots that benefits a city, but it costs a lot to do it. And that's taxpayer money. So
like if you're smart enough doing the eventing.
Yeah. And it's worse too with the IOC because you're not allowed to put sponsorship on the boards or on the jerseys or anything. Like, it's IOC only at the events. Yes, the broadcasters can, get some sponsorship deals with their broadcasts and whatnot, but and yes, it does benefit local business because you have an influx of international visitors coming in and experiencing the city, and hotels prosper and restaurants prosper. That's great. But if you're just someone who, works in an office and, you really don't benefit at all from a major sporting event like the Olympics or like the World Cup coming in, and all you get is traffic gridlock and headaches, knowing that your tax dollars are going to that and not going to the maintenance of regular infrastructure in the suburbs. So there's pushback there. But getting back to this, because we kind of disappeared there for a second. Getting back to this, you had a requirement to become a host city that you have to have a professional league, a national professional league. We have that now. Once 2026 is done, what happens next?
And that's one of the biggest questions about this. Will they actually make it to 2026 for it?
They have to. There's zero question, right? It's a 10-year deal as well, too, signed in 2018. So 2028 rolls around, and CSB has sole discretion as to whether they're going to extend that 10-year deal. They're going to take a look at it, not necessarily how does it, and again, this is personal opinion, right? if I'm running the show, I need to take a look at a few things here, right? Is it financially viable to continue the CPL once that 10-year deal is done and once the World Cup is gone and Canada no longer is in line to be a host city for a future World Cup? Is it financially viable still to continue the CPL? I fear that if the finances aren't there, they'll be like, all right, who wants to run the CPL? Because we're out.
Yeah, because Canadian soccer business now basically controls League One. They're the ones who actually established League1 Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and right now they're the ones who established the Canadian Premier League. Who's going to run those?
There's the problem, right? If 2028
And,
rolls
and,
around,
and it's not just that. They held to expand League One to League One BC. Now we could talk about the other ones later. That there's news about. They're going every province
Mm-hmm.
to expand, and that's their goals. Like imagine that they expanded every single province for a semi pro league,
Mm-hmm.
and right now, and then later, it's already accomplished. You think you go to Canadian soccer business. We don't need you anymore. But who's going to financially do these things?
Well, there's the thing. If 2028 rolls around and CSB decides to not extend the deal and to pack up shop, leaving the CPL, essentially, rudderless, in front office, there's going to be an outcry for Canada Soccer to pick up the ball. Pardon the sports button or sports analogy here, but to pick up the ball and to run with it. And yeah, you'll have your broadcast rights, but then it costs a lot of money to put on those broadcasts of the CPL games and the Canadian Championship. And One Soccer does a very, very good job of promoting the game and the production, and the production value is great. Commentators are great, but at what cost? If someone like the CBC comes in and says, we'll pick up the broadcast rights for the CPL.
Or even other broadcast channels, like, for example, TSN or Sportsnet are interested. But if they would basically lower the price of it.
That's the thing. It's all of a sudden, if you have like a TSN or Sportsnet comes in, they're going to want the same kind of, we're going to take the broadcast revenue.
And it was, for example, they agreed for getting Canadian Elite Basketball League.
The Canadian Elite Basketball League is fascinating because here you have, and I'm glad you brought this up, here you have a very grassroots organization that is doing their best to, put these teams in cities. And yes, there is some shuffling going around. The Hamilton Honey Badgers are no longer the Hamilton Honey Badgers. They've changed cities. They're doing their best. And, CBC came in and they did pick up like a game of the week for a bit. And now you're seeing games on TSN, so you're getting a bigger sports audience as opposed to just CBC. But the thing is, here's again a grassroots organization, right? That is developing the game in Canada, and that's never a bad thing.
And it's not just that; it's the same age of the Canadian Premier League.
Yeah.
That's something to really question how the Canadian Elite Basketball League runs.
Keep in mind too, this isn't the States. There's only so much money to go around, and there's only so many Canadian companies that are willing to put into these kind of leagues. Too many leagues, too many sports, and companies are going to sit there and say, well, do we support basketball? Do we support soccer? Where's our money best spent? Where has it seen the most eyes? And right now, with the CEBL on TSN, they're in front of more eyes With the CPL, those games are on One Soccer. Full stop.
Yeah, if you like right now, they've already like One Soccer is already now on the already on TELUS. They already made a deal with TELUS that we're gonna broadcast on your channel, but they're not doing it on Rogers or Bell. They've already reported on that.
Well, TELUS has a very limited reach too when it comes to the provinces. You know, you're seeing more West Coast, and let's be honest, some of the best soccer crowds are in Alberta and they're in BC, especially BC. Like, kudos to the Victoria fans for how they're supporting Victoria, right? Like it's great.
Even
But
for Calvary.
yeah, exactly, right? Like, yes, FC Edmonton, not with us right now, but
No longer.
yeah, but there's more to it than that. I don't think it was the fans per se.
I think it was the marketing of it.
But the thing is, yes, Cavalry has a decent
But-
team.
But FC Edmonton, you had a history of Alfonso Davis coming from your academy, and then later goes to Vancouver Whitecaps. I think that FC Edmonton was just marketing their academy players.
Yeah. Which, all well and good, but I mean, it makes sense to make that deal with TELUS given the rabid soccer fan base in Alberta and BC. And maybe eventually somewhere along the lines, Rogers and TSN or CBC picks it up on a national level. And that's the thing too, right? That's great. Make the deal with TELUS, but you're only going to be seen in a couple provinces, right? Maybe, if we ever get a League1 Maritimes kind of thing, maybe there's a deal there to be made with like Eastlink out in the Maritimes, but, and maybe Cogeco, or even Chorus. We talked about this before. If they made a deal with Chorus and One Soccer basically got streamed onto Pluto TV as a fast network, that's going to put you in front of more eyes. And because, Pluto is free and ad supported, then, there's money there and there's eyes there, and the sponsorship that One Soccer gets for their programs and their games and whatnot gets in front of more national eyes. That's a great thing. Then you can up your ad dollars.
Like there's a lot for Canadian Premier League to go through to bring in the popularity and even expand to broadcasting. Even for even like worldwide, they go. It's all even broadcast at BT Sports, for example, even in Fox Sports in the United States. Even for example in Mexico, they have it. I think somewhere in Asia also. They're even improving around the world where to broadcast it.
I mean, you're not going to see them make a deal with someone like DAZN, because of course it's basically a competitor at that point, right? You're looking at a subscription streaming service, which is exactly what One Soccer is right now, minus that TELUS deal. But I think it's one of those things where, if the deal with TELUS, and I'm not quite sure about the specifics of the deal with TELUS, but if it's one of those things where, yeah, you have to be careful, right? If you make a deal with something like a Pluto TV, then what's the point of having a subscription streaming service if you can watch it on a fast service? It's, there are deals to be made in order to get more eyes on the game, but none of that helps Canada soccer.
It doesn't.
So that needs to be dealt with, and hopefully dealt with soon before the World Cup. Like, you've got 3 years. You got 3 years to figure this out. And because if you go into the World Cup and the national teams are still complaining about no money for international competitions and windows, and
they protest
and training
about this.
Yeah, exactly. And then so they should. If you wear the flag on your shirt,
national colors.
yeah, you hope that the finances are there to support you.
Even fix it.
Yeah. If we get to the World Cup and this is still an issue, it's going to dominate the storylines for Canadian soccer fans. Then it won't matter what they do on the field.
I think it is most likely if you're hosting, and that's usually the always thing. Is Canada really a good place to host? Well, they did host for the Women's World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
What was it, 2015?
I can't remember.
And they Canada did well, but just failed. Didn't make it all the way to the finals.
But a good showing, nevertheless.
It was a great show. It was a great show for the women's national team.
Yeah, but I think to sum it up, Canada soccer needs to fix their finances. They need to fix them soon. Otherwise, it's going to be the only thing that's talked about in 3 years. And that's a shame because the quality of the game on the pitch and the quality of the host city should be the topic.
And we could talk even for the men's. For example, you have, for example, Canada's versus Guadeloupe tied at 2. I would say they were supposed to win that. It became to a draw, 2 goals, and now you had Canada versus Guatemala. It was scoreless. Right now, they're most likely to get eliminated in the group stage of the Gold Cup. That could be one of the biggest upsets for this Gold Cup.
And such a difference, right? Leading up to the 2022
and they're
World
versing
Cup,
Cuba.
Yeah. I mean, leading up to the 2022 World Cup, they seemed unstoppable. And then all of a sudden, all these financial commitments for Canada soccer and inability to pay for certain things, that's got to weigh on the players, right? Yes, some of them are playing in very decent leagues and getting regular top-level professional competition, but not together. You need to have those competitions. You need to send those players to those competitions in the right frame of mind. If they're sitting there worried about the hotels they're going to stay at, or the plane ride to get there, or the practice before the game, or so much, then you can't concentrate on the game before you get there. You need to fix this, or the team is going to suffer. And I think you're starting to see that with these draws against teams that before they would dominate.
And that's all the problems. One of that Canada has. Also, we could go Toronto that has problems. Now they fired Bob Bradley, and now their interim head coach is Terry Dunfield.
You had to do something. The wheels had fallen off TFC. You had to do something. And, when you see the coach intentionally benching players, when you see, and again, we're not part of the team. We're not in the locker room. We don't know exactly what goes on, but it really felt like he had lost the team.
I think that it was the time for Bob Bradley to leave. It was a lot of drama, like with Lorenzo Insigne, Bernardeschi. Like Bernardeschi was basically suspended for 1 match because Bob Bradley. There was a lot of drama, anger issues.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not playing well, but you're meshing as a unit, then okay, you know what? Then it's a matter of just fixing the X's and O's. But the problem here really seemed to be Bob Bradley. Now, that being said, bringing in Terry Dunfield, don't you can't expect that everything's going to be solved with swapping coaches right away. But I think it bears noting that Bob Bradley was never a player. Terry Dunfield was. In fact, he played for TFC.
He played for TFC, and now he's been coaching for one of the Toronto FCs.
Yeah, with TFC Academy, the under-17 team. I mean, admittedly, right, it's the under-17, but he's a player. He was a player. And I've always thought that, other players respond to coaches who aren't just X's and O's guys.
But
They understand, what goes on during that 90 minutes on the pitch.
But the real problem when you have Terry Dunfield, he is a player.
But yes.
Well, what about Greg Vanney? He was a head coach for Toronto FC. He won the MLS Cup. Is that really question? If someone's not a player, is there some situation if someone is a player? It's like, for example, like Mista, who coached for Atletico Ottawa. He didn't do a really good job with Atletico Ottawa. He didn't fit in as well, and Atletico Ottawa basically fell, and basically Mista did not get a contract extension for the team, and he was replaced by Carlos Gonzalez, and he won Coach of the Year when he stepped in, and now you have Terry Dunfield replacing Bob Bradley as coach, as the
interim head coach.
But I think it really sums something. You have that person who's not a coach that started as a player, and you have a person who was a player. And look, like, people have some that they would say, well, usually a person who has some soccer experience from the beginning has that motive, that knows everything. It is always that question mark.
Okay, so Terry Dunfield's got his work cut out for him here, but let's figure out what needs to happen. Like, first things first, just ignore any chance of the playoffs. Just forget it. It's not happening this year. Terry Dunfield's mission at this point has to be figuring out how to get the team to be a team again, getting them back to trusting a coach, right? Because clearly they had just gone through something with Bob Bradley, and it did not go well. Like, it became about the personality as opposed to the team on the pitch. Now Terry Dunfield's got to come in, and he's got to repair all of that, and then he's got to repair the play on the pitch. But first, you fix the players. And I'm not saying, like, go in and start changing players and whatnot, but what I'm saying is figure out what they need. Because he, as someone who was on the pitch, who won a Canadian Championship in 2012, like, here is someone who, while he didn't win the MLS Cup, wasn't with TFC at the time, but, understands and can relate to them. If the players are saying, this is really bugging me, right? Whether it's the practice or the pitch or the turf, or whatever it may be, Dunfield's probably been there and done that, or at least experienced it, and knows how to go about maybe fixing those things. Those little things. When you're in a spiral, whether it be a personal emotional spiral or a team spiraling down the standings because of accumulated little things that are bugging everybody, you need to isolate those things and deal with them one at a time. And that clearly wasn't being done by Bob Bradley.
Well, at least Bernardeschi and Lorenzo Cine will no longer brag at anything because Bob Bradley's out.
Well, there's that, right? And for the fans, no, I don't condone throwing megaphones on the field, but it shows that at least something is being done. And I think there's going to be some wiggle room. I think there's going to be a grace period for Terry Dunfield, right? Last game, sure, they lost 1-0 on a late strike, but...
Yeah, in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. But you're almost there, right?
Almost.
He needs to fix whatever the players need, and then fix what happens in that 90 minutes.
Like Toronto FC, my opinion, maybe could have won, because right now you have some of your players that are on national duties Like, for example, Jonathan Osorio, Richie Liera. There's a lot of players that are on international duty.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they did really well to almost draw that match. But Real Salt Lake ended it with fashion in the 90th minute.
I think
That's a bummer for Terry Dunfield.
it is, right? Not every, I mean, yes, there's sometimes you get that new coach bump, right, where the players start to gel together. I think this is going to take some time, but I think the biggest selling point of this is going to be what happens in the offseason. If Bob Bradley was still coach at the end of the season and going into next year, and they're trying to attract players to come play for TFC.
They're not.
They're not.
No.
Now you have a chance to reset and rebuild that good coach-player relationship and make TFC a place where players will want to sign, and you can get some of those, maybe get back to being in the mix for the postseason. You know, so long as they're, I think the goal for this rest of this year, so long as they're competitive, you know, if you're losing 1-0 on a late strike kind of thing, and it's whatever, right? But you're in the mix. Okay. You know, if you win, if you eke out a few games here and there, or you pile up a bunch of draws, but you're in the mix, okay. But if the players start talking positively about the TFC experience, that's going to tell you all you need to know, that Terry Dunfield's the guy for the job.
Right now, when his first time coaching for Toronto FC, most likely is to basically get into the flow of it.
Yeah.
Because it's a fresh start.
Exactly. And that's what it needs to be. A fresh start. So, consider, if you consider TFC right now at one loss for this new half season, you're going to have to take a look at this as, two different halves as opposed to a whole. Because, I mean, as a whole, the team is, second worst in the East, fourth worst in the league, right? All three of your wins are coming home. You are winless on the road. You need to reverse the spiral.
And it's just surprising when fans applaud him when his name calls up.
Well, yeah. I mean, he was a Red, right? He was one of their players. So the fans are going to be a bit more behind him. So we'll see how long that grace period lasts. If TFC can start to, turn it around a little bit incrementally, then the grace period extends.
Like, imagine if, for example, Danny Dicchio was the head coach. There's a lot of players that could have been head coach.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Danny Dicchio. And he's right now doing coaching in the Toronto FC, and even Dwayne De Rosario could have been in that situation since he has an academy.
Well, I mean, the other thing too is,
but right now he's focusing on is Jose De Rosario playing for York United.
Yeah, I mean, the best players don't always necessarily make the best coaches, right?
Terry Dunfield.
But the thing is, sometimes it's those role players, those guys who understood the game and understood their role in the game at the time, and were able to see the whole field as opposed to, going back to hockey, right? You have some players who were okay. They were
Wayne
good.
Gretzky.
Oh, Wayne Gretzky was not a good coach.
Yeah.
He had that great. Wayne Gretzky is, without a doubt, the greatest player ever in the NHL. As a coach, however, when his stint in Arizona, not so much, right?
Or maybe, usually, sometimes you're really you're coaching, but maybe it could be the players that know the plays. But I would say Wayne Gretzky was not a good coach.
Yeah, but you see, with Rob Brindamore doing very well with the Carolina Hurricanes, and he was a Carolina Hurricane at the time when they won the Stanley Cup, right? You have Marty St. Louis, who's now behind the bench in Montreal. I mean, these were good players, not Gretzky level players, but really no one is. They're not even Messier level players, but or Jaromir Jagr, but they were good players, and they understood the game and how to play each role in the game. And those are the guys that are going to help their teams get to new levels. Brendan Moore's done a very good job in Carolina. Maury St. Louis now has this job ahead of him. Like, he's basically right now Terry Dunfield with the Montreal Canadiens, right?
But
Get rid of the coach, bring in a former player, not necessarily one that was with the Habs, because St. Louis never played with the Habs, but someone with enough ice cred to get the players to work together. Here, Terry Dunfield's got enough field cred to get the players to work together to try and better TFC.
But there's also, for example, they even fired some of the coaching staff. That's what I've heard from that they decided, we're going to fire some of the coaching staff for Toronto FC and replace some of them. And they could have, for example, I could have put on the list that they could have hired as head coach Bobby Smarionis. He's won right now 3 Canadian Shields for the Canadian Premier League. Most likely to.
But the thing is, but they're midstream as well in the CPL. You're not going to see a coaching change like that or pull someone out of a team and bring them up. But in the off season, maybe Dunfield's just the guy to help. Put a Band-Aid on the situation, and then in the off season you bring in someone like that.
Yeah.
But right now, Dunfield is he's a field medic at this point.
Right, right now, that's where I heard Bobby Smarionis signed a 3-year deal. Maybe Toronto FC would try to bump in and decide, we have a better deal for you
to come in with TFC. Yeah, no,
take over.
It's a possibility. It's very much a possibility because as we mentioned before, contracts can be renegotiated. You have to think that to make that jump to TFC and to fix that situation, that's a big opportunity, right? To bump up your coaching cred to that next professional level. And if that's the case, if that's the game plan, and Dunfield is just playing triage right now with TFC, okay. Right? And maybe then Dunfield stays on as assistant or whatever the case may be. But still, triage needs to happen first.
Or
stem the bleeding.
Or, for example, Pacific FC's head coach and, what was it? Even, for example, former Pacific FC's Pablo Ducal.
Oh, there are options. Absolutely. And you have to think, any organization is going to be, there's a reason why the word interim is there, right? Dunfield's there for now. And if TFC turns around and they start winning a few games, even if they don't make the playoffs, but they become competitive again, then yeah, you drop the interim tag. But, right now, if Dunfield wants to continue coaching TFC, then he needs to get the players to start to win or at least not lose. If he wants to stay with the organization, then he needs to triage it, stem the bleeding, and then maybe go back to the academy when they bring in a new head coach. But it remains to be seen, and we're going to see over the next few months just how good a field medic Dunfield is.
Or intercoach.
Exactly.
Or he might get might be the right one for being a seasoned head coach.
If the players play for him, then yes, he is. Absolutely.
When hearing the word inter, for example, the Interprovincial League, League1 Canada, League1 Canada is now going to expand in prairies. They've already announced they've been already expanded in Alberta, which their first season will be in 2024, and now League1 Prairies, also League1 Atlantic, still pending right now, and League1 Prairies, most likely their season could be in 2025.
You take a look at what you've got now with League One, right? At least going. You got Quebec, 12 teams. You got Ontario, 21 teams.
With the promotion relegation will be next season.
Right. You got BC, 8 teams. right? And and then Alberta, will be 5 teams.
And they're hoping to expand that for their season.
Yeah, and it makes sense to have a prairies. Like, you couldn't just do a League 1 Saskatchewan or a League 1 Manitoba because the populations aren't there. Just to put it into perspective here, the population of Alberta alone is 4.6 million. Combined, Manitoba and Saskatchewan are 2.6 million Canadians. Right? So on a population scale, it makes sense to combine both Manitoba and Saskatchewan. That being said, too, you want to take a look at League 1 Maritimes. The population of all 4 maritime provinces is about equal to what the prairies would be with Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So it makes sense to have a League 1 Maritimes. But that being said, if that happens and we get League 1 Maritimes, then you're going to get to this point where you have, do the math there, 6 different leagues. Now you have the opportunity to have these League 1 competitions every year where it's like, okay, if we take the top 2 teams in the standings, regardless of how they do in their provincial championships, but the top 2 teams in their standings play in a tournament, where you've got like, okay, here's 12 teams. The top 2 teams of each league, as far as points go, play in a tournament with each other. Get an FA Cup style tournament. Like, maybe you do have all of a sudden this kind of FA Cup style event in Canada with all of these teams. And, because we see it with the Canadian Championships, where a team like Rovers can win, albeit in the first round, but still, those Cinderella type stories are great. And they're great for the smaller communities.
Like, for example, TSS Rovers.
Exactly, yeah.
And I brought up, like, the Interprovincial League. It's all the provinces of League 1 Canada, BC, Ontario, Quebec. Now they bring in Alberta. Now they're going to prairies and they're going to go for the Atlantic, which is still pending.
Yeah, which it almost feels like a no-brainer, right? The CPL has already planted a flag in there, and if you remember during the pandemic, it was out in the Maritimes where they had that small tournament for the CPL at the time just to kind of get the ball rolling again. But if you can do that, that just shows you how good CSB is in helping expand the game, especially if there's enough sponsorship money to go around for all of those teams, and that's going to be the big deal. But once the provinces start competing against each other, and once the eyes get turned on to that, it's going to be great. I personally love the earlier rounds of the FA Cup because you see those smaller teams build up. And I'm not even going to just point out Wrexham here, because Wrexham was a phenomenal story. But the thing is,
which it got promoted for the English.
Yeah, but the thing is, and maybe it's because we saw a lot of it here in Canada, because of course, all hail Ryan Reynolds. But it's one of those things where people got behind this small little team because it was a Cinderella story, right? Had Rovers or Vaughan done well in the Canadian Championship beyond the first round, it would have become a Cinderella. Everyone loves a Cinderella story. And all these smaller communities with the chance to play against each other in an FA Cup style tournament, why not?
But not just that. There are like, for example, you brought in Vaughan Azzurri. Vaughan Azzurri actually almost beated Halifax Wanderers in 2019 in the Canadian Championship. By the final score in aggregate, Halifax Wanderers won by away goals.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to bring into League 1 Atlantic. Right now, they already decided meeting for a League 1 Atlantic. So right now, I'm hearing that they have the Maritimes. There's 3 teams being involved. One in Fredericton. There's one in Nova Scotia, and there's one in Prince Edward Island, which is just basically just friendlies. Still waiting for the whole.
The groundwork is clearly being laid. The thought process is there, and it takes time. It does take time, and you need to find. It would be tougher with the Maritimes too, because of course, like, travel from island to island or island to peninsula or whatever the case may be, presents a bit of a challenge financially. But I think that the Maritimes are hungry enough for their own soccer league, be it at the provincial level.
Well, well, at least you have a Canadian Premier League in Halifax.
But consider, if you will, one of the charms of the FA Cup, and I know I keep leaning on this, but hear with me here. I remember watching, I think it was a third round or fourth round match or something like that in the FA Cup one year, and it was this small little club, and their pitch was basically up against the backyards of a bunch of houses. It's tucked into little suburbia kind of thing, and it's fine. They had done well enough, and now they're hosting Tottenham, where people are looking out their back windows, watching Tottenham play against their home club. And there's just something about that. Now you consider, a team like Forge FC rolling into a smaller maritime club. Forge FC, clearly the pinnacle of CPL over the past years, rolling into a small Prince Edward Island club and playing an FA Cup style match against them. That is fascinating. And to be able to have that kind of national ability for its own homegrown Cinderella story, I don't watch soccer all the time, but sign me up for that.
There are previous time that they were versing a semi-pro team were basically League1 Quebec that they always versed from the start, and the talent in League1 Quebec is more, I would say, better than League1 Ontario. I might be wrong about this, but usually Forge FC usually gets players from Sigma, but you have a lot of players going to Forge FC and Sigma.
I think the key thing to look at this is, yes, it's great. These lesser served provinces and regions of the country are now starting to get a league of their own, if you will, right? But I think the biggest thing and why I'm not as upset with the CSB deal as others are is that it's over the years it has actually created not just soccer leagues here, but basically a national soccer ecosystem, right? Where one feeds the next, which feeds the next, which feeds the next, which feeds the national, right? You now have ability for someone in a small team in a smally populated city. I know smally is not necessarily a word, but I'm going to take it anyways. But a small population city, and there's a pathway there. And the minute there's a pathway for someone who's determined enough to get to the national team, you're going to see that path start to get walked more. And that's always been the thing with why there's such a big hockey ecosystem in this country, right? Someone plays for the OJHL knowing that there have been players in the past that have made it to not just, the OHL and not just the NHL, but to the Stanley Cup, the pinnacle, or the Olympics, right? That's why kids at a young age start playing hockey, because there's a dream. And others have done the same dream, walked the same path, or skated the same path, all the way to the pinnacle, to the peak of the mountain. The path has arrows on it. The path is known. Now, with a soccer ecosystem in this country, there's a path that can start to be built from those small little towns with their own homegrown team to the World Cup through the national team. There's a path. And if the expansion of League One leads to the betterment of the national team through the development of the game at the national level or at the root level, people are going to be praising the deal, the CSB deal.
Yeah. Now we talked about the Maritimes. Let's focus on the prairies.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, too, with the prairies, right? Saskatchewan and Manitoba, you watch a CFL game. You watch a Rough Riders game or a Blue Bombers game. Their fans wholeheartedly embrace their teams. Wholeheartedly, right? Teams like the Regina Pats, right? Teams like, while they were there, the Manitoba Moose, right? They were welcomed, right? The Jets, the Winnipeg Jets, beloved. Winnipeg's a great city, right? The prairies are right for expanding the game, right? Because the key thing here is that you have cities that are kind of unrepresented or underrepresented in sport, right? When you make a team, first three cities come to mind: Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, because those are the most populous. That's where you're going to get the most ticket buyers by simply existing. But then you start to look at the smaller cities as well: your Calgarys, your Hamiltons, your Quebec City, right? Your Halifax. There's population there, so there's ticket sales there. Saskatchewan and Manitoba sometimes become an afterthought, and it's based on population, and it's based on visibility. Now, you're going to have a league that covers those two provinces, a provincial league that's in part already by existing in part of a larger soccer ecosystem. You have to think that the introduction of Alberta and the prairies leads to the expansion of the Canadian Championship. And that's going to, you think about it, right? If there's a team in Saskatoon and they get to host a Canadian Championship game, and in walks in a TFC or a CF Montreal, right? That's an MLS professional team, and in TFC's case, one that has won the MLS Cup in the past, rolling in to Saskatoon or rolling into Winnipeg, Manitoba, or any of the other cities that will eventually have their own teams in the prairies. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Win or lose, that's a big deal, and that's big ticket sales.
And when I think about the League1 prairies, the question of the whole project, that which teams are going to be interested. So right now, hearing Saskatchewan, usually you don't really have that much popular academy teams that you could find. I think some people in Saskatchewan know some in Saskatchewan. Everyone knows Drew Becky and the famous female player that plays for the women's national team. And you go to Manitoba, you have from USL to FC Manitoba is going to be part of this project for League1 Prairies. Even hearing their sources coming in from Dino Rossi in this project, Thunder Bay Chill could be in it.
Thunder Bay makes sense. It's close enough. It is. It's close enough. When you think about, those Ontario, Manitoba border towns, right? I mean, Ontario already at 21 teams, right? They don't need to expand anymore. Otherwise, the ecosystem becomes too big and starts to eat itself. So if you put a city like Thunder Bay, where it's close enough to Manitoba that you could consider it close enough to the prairies, okay, that's fine. If it helps develop the League1 prairies, do it. Absolutely. Because think about it, right? Regina, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, Brandon. If you're looking for a fifth team, Thunder Bay is a good option.
Even, for example, like League1 Quebec, you heard about South Ottawa United. It used to be part of League1 Ontario. They decided, you know what, it's too far for us to travel. We're going to go with the Quebec.
Yeah. You think about it, right? It's 4 hours driving from Ottawa to Toronto, if you're following the speed limit. Sorry, but it's across the bridge to go to Gatineau. It's 2 hours to Montreal if you follow the speed limit. But it is. It's from a logistics perspective, a city like Ottawa, you could easily see why it would be included in Quebec, especially if Ontario is already as massive as it is as far as number of teams. Quebec with 12, you need to balance things, right? Because right now, BC's got 8. That's enough for a decent playoffs, right? Alberta right now is slated to have 5. It's not necessarily the biggest of playoffs there. It's going to be like the top 2 teams in the standings will play each other probably for a championship, right? Like the Prairies, if they're looking at 5 as well, then maybe you have like some kind of competition between Alberta and so the top team in Alberta and the top team in the prairies, or the top two, go into their own little playoff bracket. There's a way to make it all work. And, if you try to diminish the prairies by saying, well, there's Thunder Bay in there, it's not really, well, it's close enough, right? Whatever it takes to make the ecosystem work, feed it.
Yeah. And mentioning about League1 Alberta, you have Calgary Foothills, former USL League 2, even BTB SC from Edmonton, from USL League 2. So they're bringing. It's actually surprising some of these Canadian teams actually coming back to Canada for these projects.
Yeah, the expansion is good.
It is
if it's maintained.
And some of the Alberta teams are actually St. Albert Impact is from the Major League Alberta, even the Edmonton Scottish for also.
Yeah, the teams are there.
And Calgary, the under 21.
Yeah,
which is basically for the academy for the Calgary FC.
Yeah, the teams are there. The infrastructure is there. All you need to do is make it happen and organize it.
Yeah, I hope they expand more in Alberta. I hope the Prairies project does really well to find teams that are willing to do this, and hope even the Maritimes hoping to do it, or even other ones, for example the Territories maybe.
What's funny? I took a look at the population of the Territories, and it's not gonna happen.
Which I seen there was a team in Yukon.
Well, I mean, here's the thing: if you had a team, right, say in Whitehorse or Yellowknife, that was close enough to one of those leagues, you could argue, with Alberta or with the Prairies, if there's a team in the southern part of the Northwest Territories that it would be, not as much of a problem in order for them to be able to commute to play those games, then why not? You're never going to get a League 1 Territories, but there's nothing to say that the Territories don't get involved in some of these leagues.
Maybe just make a run of it, like a series, and decide if it could work for it. Maybe it might not.
No, I mean, there is soccer in Nunavut. There is. It's just not at that level. I mean, you could, in theory, have a Nunavut team in the Prairies if you wanted to. It just needs to be viable for that team to come down.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, the Nunavut Soccer Association. So
yeah, they for example, even in Yukon and Northwest, each province and territory has a association.
Oh, absolutely. It's like I said, you're never going to get a League 1 solely for the territories, but the path is there for them to join BC or Alberta or the Prairies if it's close enough and makes sense.
But does Dino Rossi have the guts to actually make that project?
I don't think it's about guts. I think it's more, in all honesty, I think it's more about
these associations.
Not even the associations. Is the population there to buy tickets to support a team? And that's kind of what it boils down to, right? You could put a soccer team wherever you want, but if no one goes to pay to see them, then there's nothing paying those players. There's nothing paying, the ability to play there.
Or even the prize money.
Exactly, right? If your whole financial ecosystem is based on winning the championship in the first year, that's a bad business model, right? You have to treat these teams like business. And if the customer base isn't there, the business is going to fail.
Or even, for example, Newfoundland Labrador. Could that be it?
Oh, that could absolutely be, especially because it's connected by land to Quebec, right? So you are going to have people in very eastern Quebec going over to watch games. Like, there is that possibility.
Or maybe they could have their own League 1 Newfoundland and Labrador.
Now, the population's not there for their own league. You have
Or
to,
maybe they could, or maybe,
all part of the
or maybe League 1 Atlantic.
Yeah, exactly. League 1 Atlantic or League 1 Maritimes, whatever you want to call it, put those 4 provinces, Newfoundland, Labrador, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Nova Scotia, group them all together as like the easternmost wing of the League 1 Canada ecosystem.
And that's full time on this episode of the Red Leaf Card. I'm Jacob Cheru, subbing out.